Again, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Vishwak, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft, and I'm really glad to be here to be talking to you guys about bots, Microsoft Bot Framework, designing for conversational experiences, as well as give you guys a sneak peek of Conversation Designer. But before we get started, a quick show of hands. I had a couple of questions. Who in here knows what a bot is? Wow, awesome. And who in here knows what Microsoft Bot Framework is? Excellent. And who in here knows how to design great conversational experiences? That was fantastic. So there were almost every single hand that went up for the first and second question. The third question, not so much. But I'm fairly confident that at the end of this session, each one of you will walk away with answers to all those three questions. So let's get started. First off, we are seeing an explosive growth in this space. In just under 2 years that the Microsoft Bot Framework has been around, we already see 10+ million messages that are flowing through our systems. We have over 190,000 registered bot developers, and on any given week, we see more than 14,000 bots that are active. These stats are truly impressive. It's just been phenomenal to watch the growth in this space, and it's gaining momentum every single day. We have also shipped hundreds of new features to the Microsoft Bot Framework in just this year. And we still have 3 more months left in this calendar year. I'm sure that with all of your support, we will continue to pull off amazing new features and experiences together in the months to come. Okay, so what is the bot? A bot is a conversational app. They are appealing, effective, easy, and natural to use. They help achieve engaging conversations with your user by adapting to context. Context about the user, context about the environment, and context about the device where the conversations are happening. You can type to your bot, you can talk to it, and you can also tap to interact with it. Also, bots help you reach your users no matter where they are. Across several different channels that are supported by Microsoft Bot Framework today, including Cortana, Slack, Skype, Facebook Messenger, web chat, and many more. A bot really is a REST endpoint. We have an SDK that allows you to model conversational experiences for your bot. And then there are a bunch of different powerful AI tools like LUIS, the Language Understanding and Intelligence Service, and several others that can help power your bot conversations. You can publish your bot to several different channels to help connect your users with your bot. So your bot straight up is just a piece of code. It runs great on Azure, but you could also have it hosted in your own cloud or data center. So what is the bot framework? Microsoft Bot Framework is made up of 3 key pieces: the channels, the hosting services, as well as tools. We have a fantastic set of channels ranging from direct line and web chat, which allows you to embed conversational experiences powered by the bot straight into your own custom website or app, ranging through several different first and third-party channels that are supported by Microsoft Bot Framework. In all, we have 14 different channels that we support today, and that list keeps growing. In terms of hosting options, you have 2 different choices. You could go with Azure Bot Service that sort of allows you to easily get set up with your bot in Azure. The other option is Conversation Designer, which you will learn about more in the second half of this session. We also have a fantastic set of channels, as I was talking about. And tooling is another key thing that is sort of part of Bot Framework. The tools that we have sort of allow you and help you to conceive, design, develop, debug, manage your bots effectively. The tools we have range from emulator, channel inspector, through to the SDK itself, and analytics solution, and more. Let's take a quick look at all these assets. Dev.botframework.com is the home of Microsoft Bot Framework. You'll find tons of useful information here as well as assets to help you build great bots. We also have an active blog out here. The Bot Builder SDK is itself open source and available on GitHub. And by the way, it's a very, very active project with tons of contributions from the community. Here's the Azure Bot service, as I was talking about. You get two different options to host your bot on Azure. You could either use Azure Functions, or you could leverage the full power of Azure Web Apps for your bot. Rounding back to dev.botframework.com, here's the view of all my bots. We have made it super easy for you to either register your Bot Builder SDK-based bot, or you could get started right here in the portal and build an Azure Bot Service bot. With that said, let's take a closer look at designing for conversational experiences. So what makes a bot great? Let's start with this very fundamental question. It's not really about how much AI your bot has. It's not about how sophisticated or complex your language model for your bot is. It's not about whether your bot can talk or whether it can show cards with buttons. So what is it really that makes a bot great? Just as with any other successful and great product or app or website that's out there, great bots are really effective at solving for a specific user need and scenario. They possess some specific skills or qualities or traits. They have well-defined behavioral and personality traits. Great bots support conversational experiences. They are also one that adapt to context. Context about the user, context about the device, context about the environment or environmental understanding. What we have come to realize is that to build a great bot, several different key aspects need to come together. These include language understanding, language generation, dialogue, user experience, your own business logic, speech recognition, and text-to-speech. Language understanding is all about going from a given user input or utterance to being able to understand the specific domain or intent that that utterance belongs to. Once you have the intent, then you could see if that is a specific task that you can help fulfill for the user. This also includes extracting meaningful information from what the user has specified as entities that your bot can then use to help the user complete the task. Language generation, in some sense, is reverse of language understanding. It's sort of where, given all the context and entities that your bot has, it needs to then figure out how to construct useful and meaningful and grammatically correct sentences to then communicate back with the user. Dialogue is about the conversation model itself. It's the back and forth conversation that goes on between the bot and the user, and you get to design for that. User experience is all about device context. Given the specific device or form factor that the user is in, your bot then needs to be mindful of all the available input and output modalities on that specific device. It then needs to be able to use them effectively to have a nice conversation with the user and give them the best possible experience. None of these work in isolation without your business logic. These are rules that help control the conversational flow. These are business rules that help validate entities that the user has specified, and these are also the logic that sort of help with the task completion for the bot. Depending on the specific device that your user is engaging in a conversational experience with your bot, the device might support audio in and out, and in those cases, you might choose or you might need to have a good speech recognition system, as well as a good text-to-speech system for your bot to both be able to talk back to the user as well as understand user speech. All of these primitives today are powered by Microsoft Cognitive Services, and actually a lot more. Bots, in fact, are an excellent gateway to cognitive services. There are over 30 different cognitive service APIs that Microsoft offers in the Microsoft Cognitive Services suite that you could use to power your bot. Bots do work great with Microsoft Cognitive Services, but you can also bring your own AI tooling or services or mix and match however you see fit. Conversations are actually quickly evolving to become ubiquitous. Ubiquitous conversations truly help amplify your bot as well as your brand. It's really about being aware of where the user is. They could be across a plethora of devices and form factors, but you still want to have one central bot intelligence that helps power all of those conversations. No matter where your users are, be it a custom app or website that you have, or they could be on a custom device or an IoT device that you're shipping, or they could be in any of the first or third-party channels supported by Microsoft Bot Framework. From the end user's point of view, this gives them continuity, one where they get to experience your consistent bot, brand, as well as experience, no matter where they are. For ubiquitous conversations to shine, bots need to seamlessly adapt to device context. They need to be aware of the specific available input-output modalities on the device and also be form factor aware. As an example, your user could be interacting with your bot in a social communication app like Facebook Messenger or Skype. Or they could be in your own custom app or website or on your custom IoT device. In each of those cases, depending on what the device or form factor supports, the user could actually be typing to your bot, they could be talking to your bot, or they could expect to be able to click or tap to interact with it. The bot must then use that context to have a smart conversation with the user, one where it can talk back to the user, one where it can type back to the user, or one where it can present rich UI cards or elements that the user could click or tap on to interact with the bot. Here's sort of the best practices of where and why each of these scenarios are useful. If the user is already in a communication app like Facebook Messenger or Skype that I was talking about, then they are already typing quite a bit in those experiences. If you're building a bot that targets those kind of experiences, then for sure you must support type because it's a great fit. You might also have the user be in your own custom app or website on a phone PC kind of form factor. On those devices and form factors, users sort of expect to be able to click and tap on things to make their way around or get their task done. So if your bot is targeting those scenarios, then for sure you should consider supporting tap, like in the way of cards or UI elements. Finally, there are several emerging IoT devices out there that have very limited display surface. There are also a lot of devices out there that are venturing into a new space where they don't have a display surface at all. Other emerging trends, like with augmented and virtual reality devices, speech is sort of being pitched as the primary user's input-output modality. For your bot to be successful in those scenarios, you for sure need to have your bot capable of being able to both talk to the user as well as be able to understand user speech. All that said, let's take a look at a demo that sort of stitches all of this together. For the purposes of the demo, we're going to use Contoso Cafe. It is a fictitious coffee shop that is based out of the Pacific Northwest. Here's the official website for Contoso Cafe, and they have decided to power, or actually host, an in-website conversational experience that's powered by their bot. You can start talking to their bot simply by hitting the chat button. Let's try and talk to this bot. This bot here is actually using the speech-enabled web chat control that's provided by Microsoft Bot Framework. Let's start by saying something to the bot. So I'm going to say hi. The bot came back, introduced itself, and asked, how can I help? Now I'm going to ask it, what can you do? Okay, so it came back and said it's the cafe bot, and it can help me book table, order sandwiches, find cafe locations, and more. This specific answer to this question is super critical when it comes to conversational experiences. Unlike other UI paradigms where the user has the option where you could throw in a button or piece of text somewhere to let the user know what is it that your app or website can do, with conversational experiences, users are going to discover what is it that your bot can do in a conversational fashion. Sure. Is that better? Excellent. Notice that this bot also has an option for me to talk to it. So let's try and talk to it and see how it behaves. Who are you?
Hello, I'm the Contoso Cafe bot. How should I address you?
Why do you need my name?
I need your name to be able to address you correctly.
Okay, let me give it my name. I'm going to type in my name, submit. And it picked up my name. It says it's nice to meet. All right, so let's try one other speech scenarios, and I want to come back to all of these and sum them up. Where can I get coffee?
Did you have a city in mind?
Orlando, Florida.
Sorry, that does not work. Please choose from these locations. Here's what I found for Seattle, Washington.
Let's try one more thing here. Who am I?
Hello, Dishwack. Nice to meet you. I'm the Contoso Cafe bot.
Didn't that feel fluid? So there are a bunch of things that are going on here that I want to come back and highlight. Initially, when I started typing to the bot didn't talk back to me. It did not give me cards or anything. But it did type back to me, and I did make my way through it just fine. Then when I started talking to the bot started talking back to me. And in cases where, in the case where I was asking, why do you ask for my name? Things like names are really hard for speech recognition systems to get right. And so in that case, the bot, instead of trying to keep doing that over speech, decided to come back with a card where I could type in my name, hit submit, and it got the correct spelling for my name, and everything went through just fine. Then when I was asking for it to find cafe locations, I gave it Orlando, Florida, because that's where we are right now. But that doesn't work for Contoso Cafe, because they're just based out of Pacific Northwest, and they don't have any businesses here. So it came back and told me that these are the specific locations I have businesses in, but it also gave me a bunch of UI elements to click from, because it was a very small and finite set of things that the user could choose from. I just went ahead and clicked it, and the bot picked it up. And at the end of it, it sort of came back and included a card as well in this case. And the card is actually really powerful in this case because it gives me a lot more information. I know what the address for the store is. I get a nice picture of what the store looks like. And I also get sort of quick link buttons that I can click on to do more with this specific experience. This is all about understanding the device, having the device context. Finally, when I asked the bot, who am I, it already asked me for my question. So it's sort of also knowing what the user is doing as well as keeping user's context. And it came back and addressed me correctly and then said, how can I help you? Let's stay here and try this bot out in a couple of other channels. Let's say we want to switch over to Facebook Messenger. Say the user is already in Facebook Messenger and they discover Contoso Cafe bot right there. And they could talk to the bot just fine by typing. So I'm going to say something like, book a table for 2 in Seattle for next Thursday at 3 p.m. So it picked up all pieces of information. It's showing me a card for me to eyeball and make sure everything looks good. I'm just going to say, yeah, go ahead and book it. and it booked the table. Let's try and talk to the exact same bot in Cortana. Imagine that I'm driving back from work and I'm in Seattle, and I would like to stop by into the Seattle store to get a quick cup of coffee. But I don't have the address handy with me. So I could just ask Cortana to get that for me through Contoso Cafe bot. Ask Contoso Coffee to text driving directions to the Seattle store. That didn't work. Let's try one more time. Ask Contoso Coffee to text driving directions to the Seattle store.
Here's what I found for Seattle, Washington. Sent you a text.
So while that is happening, I got a text message to my phone that synced up here as a notification through Cortana. But imagine I was on the phone, I could just hit up this link and get the directions to that store. Let's try and talk to this exact same bot in Skype. I'm going to ask by saying, let's say I'm planning to go to the Contoso Cafe with my friend, and I would like to know what my options are for a specific time range. So I'm going to ask what stores are open next Wednesday at 3 p.m. So it found 4 different stores. It came back with a nice carousel experience of cards that showed me every single store that is open. I could quickly go into the store page or book a table in any of those stores. But I changed my mind. I want to see what stores are open at 10 p.m. So I just say, and at 10 p.m. That might not work because I just typed it. Oh, that did work. So the only thing that's open at 10 p.m. is the Seattle coffee shop, and the bot came back with the card for that specific case. So what you saw here in these set of demos are a couple of different things. One is that you had one exact same bot or a central bot intelligence that has been powering these conversations no matter where the user is, across Cortana, Facebook Messenger, in Skype, as well as in your own custom website. The second thing is that the bot was able to have or provide me with a very fluid experience to interact with it by talking back to me, typing back to me, as well as rendering cards where it was relevant or useful contextually. The third thing was that it also knew who I was and kept track of who I am in understanding and keeping track of user context as well. In the space of designing for great bots, dialogue plays a very critical part. This is sort of the back and forth conversation model between the bot as well as the user. What we have come to see based on all the bots that are out there, as well as reflecting on our own experience building first-party Cortana skills, are 3 different types of dialogues. Single-turn conversations are ones that are modeled or great for modeling simple question and answer pairs. In these cases, typically, there aren't any follow-up question from the user on the specific conversation topic, and the bot doesn't need to ask the user for clarifying questions as well. Things like Q&A, facts, or answers model very well in this type of dialogue. Then there is the structured directed flows. This is great for modeling scenarios that require a bunch of different pieces of information that the bot needs to collect from the user before being able to complete a task for them. These conversations are on the rail, meaning the user and bot go back and forth as long as each one of them sort of know what is it that they're trying to do, as well as all the pieces of information that is required to get that done. By definition, these type of dialogues are multi-turn capable, but they could also be single-turn if the user specified every single required piece of information in one turn. For sure, these rely on a ton of business logic that sort of help control the conversational flow, as well as things like being able to validate the entities that the user has specified. Being able to book tickets, form filling, ordering stuff are good example scenarios that model well in this bucket. The third type of dialogue that we see is one where there is a ton of context. We're calling it context carryover. This is sort of typically an open-ended conversation between the user and bot in a specific domain or intent. By definition, these are also multi-turn capable, but relies heavily on context from prior conversations between the bot and the user for the bot to be able to come back with an answer for the user. Search refinement is a fantastic problem that sort of fits well in this type of dialogue. Let's say that me as a user is asking my bot to find pictures from my Hawaii trip last summer, and it came back with like 100 pictures. And then I could just ask it to show me the pictures from my trip, show me pictures that were at the beach at sunset. The bot needs to understand that I'm trying to refine the results that it came back with, and I'm sort of trying to apply a filter, and needs to be able to effectively do that, apply that filter, and come back with lesser number of results. That's what we mean by search refinement here. Let's see a quick demo of these three different types of dialogues. Let's go back to the Contoso Cafe website, and I'm going to use this exact same experience to help demonstrate them. Let's start by saying, who's your CEO? I'm asking this to the Contoso Cafe bot. It came back with a response, so Joshua Newman is the CEO of Contoso Cafe. I know that. I don't have any follow-up questions, but I'm going to ask it, what are your locations? It came back with an answer that they have businesses in these 4 cities. This is what I mean by a single-turn conversation. It's sort of question and answer pair that the bot can answer, typically that are in follow-up questions from the user. Let's try something for structured directed flow. So if I said something like book a table, this is the on-the-rails experience where the bot is trying to collect every single required piece of information from the user. So it's now asking, do I have a city in mind? I'm just going to say Seattle. And then when would I like to come in? Tomorrow at 3 p.m. How many guests? It's just going to be me and my wife, 2 guests. It picked up all those pieces of information. Now it's just asking me to confirm it. Just going to hit book it. And it did book the table. So that sort of gave you an example of what we mean by structured directed flow. Then the next one is context carryover type dialogue. Let's use this exact same bot, and I'm going to ask it, is the Seattle store open next Friday at 10 p.m.? Comes back and says the Seattle store is open, but notice that it did something subtle there. It adjusted for the time zone because in Seattle, 10 p.m. here might actually be 7 p.m. there. So it came back and said, yes, the Seattle store is open at 7 p.m. Now if I say something like, what about the Renton store? The bot sort of picked up context that I'm still trying to find information about a specific cafe location. It carried forward the date and time that I had previously specified, just swapped out the city, which was one of the entities that it could handle, and came back with an answer for that store, but it still used the exact same date and time. I could also use the context carryover for a more generalization kind of problem. If I said something like, what stores are open next Friday, then I'm swapping out the city, but I'm keeping the time, but I'm changing the date. So it sort of comes back with an answer for that as well. There are 2 different stores that I could pick and choose from for that specific date and time. Hopefully that gave you a sort of sense for what we mean by the 3 different types of dialogue. To help you effectively model single-turn conversations, we have an amazing tool called QnAMaker.ai. It's one of Microsoft cognitive services that helps you easily and quickly, in a no-code experience, get set up with question and answer pairs that can help power single-turn conversations. There are a bunch of different options to get started on QnAMaker.ai. If you already had FAQ pages, then you could build a service using that. Or we also support tons of different file formats that you can use to import your question and answer pairs from. Let's take a quick look at a demo of that. So here's the Contoso Cafe's Q&A service that I already set up. And here are the actual question and answer pairs. Some of the questions that I asked the bot are actually being powered by the QnAMaker service, like who's your CEO and what are your locations, are being answered here. QnAMaker also has a fantastic test and refinement experience where you could go through and try a bunch of different things that your user could ask the QnAMaker service, and then retrain the model or say what is the right answer for the specific question that the user is asking. So things like, who's your CEO? Comes back with an answer. There are no other better matches. I could add an alternate phrase for this exact same question right here in line. And let's try a couple of other things. What are your locations? We tried this in the Contoso Cafe example, but it's the same thing that's being backed by this specific cognitive service. Came back with an answer for that. And then if I say something like, is the grass green? There isn't an answer for that question in this specific knowledge base, and it came back and said, I don't have an answer. So to sum it all up, there are sort of good and the challenging things with designing for great conversational experiences. So what are the good things with conversational experiences in general? The good thing is that conversational experiences are easier and more natural for users to understand and interact with. Gone are the days when you have to get into an app or website experience and look at their FAQ or look at their tutorial to sort of understand what is it that you can do and how you can do it. People are going to expect to want to get to know what is it that your bot can do, get contextual help as they're trying to get something done with your bot, and that's sort of the good thing. Traversal problems are fantastic to model as conversational experiences. We as humans have the power of language, and we can express a fairly complex traversal problem very effectively using natural language. For instance, I could easily conceive and say something like, book a table for 3 in Redmond for next Thursday at 3 p.m. That just comes naturally to me. In a classic app or UI-based experience sense, I would have to click through a bunch of different UI elements and typed in a bunch of different places to just be able to express that very specific phrase. There are also devices that are coming up with limited or no display. There are also devices that are already out there where typing is either not an option or is really cumbersome. Examples include Xbox as well as Cortana Invoke Speaker. The challenges with conversational experiences or designing for conversational experiences are really about figuring out the right language understanding model for your bot. Having that be able to understand conversational tangents. This is where when the user is talking to your bot and they all of a sudden want to go do something else. Being able to understand that, being able to do the right thing can be a challenge. Things like supporting corrections or forward slot filling can also be a challenge. It's also equally hard to sort of figure out what the right conversation model for your bot is, for you to be able to choose from the 3 different types of dialogues given your specific scenario. Environment can be a challenge. For instance, speech doesn't work really well in noisy environments. And finally, the very thing that sort of makes bot great, which is being able to adapt to context, can be the biggest challenge as well. Next up, I'm really excited to give you guys a sneak peek into Conversation Designer and talk more about it. So what are we building? Conversation Designer is targeting to provide a one-stop shop development experience for you to model conversational scenarios or experiences. It seamlessly brings together several different aspects that we were talking about that are critical for bot development, including language understanding, language generation, dialogue, user experience, and your own business logic. It is a visual authoring experience to build conversational bots. You will get very clear separation between your bot's conversation logic as well as business logic with a conversation runtime that helps power your bot conversations. So why are we building it? Just as with any product development, building great bots is going to require a team to come together. It's going to be a multi-role, interdisciplinary effort, one that spans across designers, writers, localizers, developers, and many more. We are betting on and building a visual authoring experience that makes bot building and designing for bots more approachable to a wide variety of people across different roles. We have tons of learnings from the Bot Framework community, from you guys, as well as we've had an opportunity to reflect on what and how we have been designing and building our own first-party Cortana skills as well. So we're taking all of that learnings and applying that to Conversation Designer. So it's going to be a visual tool to help conversational model, which end-to-end, that users can then be able to type to your bot, talk to your bot, and also tap to your bot. It still sort of keeps that exact same good design principles in mind. Modeling conversations in code behind can also be a challenge, especially because as your scenario complexity increases, code complexity increases, and it's also really hard to get set up upfront to have your code be modular, in the sense that if you want to use the exact same resolve date and time flow, conversational flow, in two different tasks, that can be a challenge if you're not thinking about it early on as well. That's something that Conversation Designer will help address because it's sort of super modular from the ground up. Finally, even from complete point of view, there exists a gap here. There exists a gap for a tool that provides a holistic view into designing and building conversational experiences. As I was talking about, Conversation Designer covers every single aspect of bot development. For language understanding, we have deep integration with LUIS, the Language Understanding Intelligence Service. It's part of Microsoft Cognitive Service. Of course, you can choose to bring your own AI tool or service and hook that up in Conversation Designer using a script trigger. For dialogue, to support the spectrum of 3 different types of dialogues we were talking about, we offer simple reply and script action that allow you to do single-turn conversations. We also support dialogue action, which you can then use for both structured directed flow as well as context carryover type conversations. From the language generation point of view, just so your bot doesn't always sound dull and monotonous, it should have variability in the responses that it comes back. So we support simple and conditional response templates. These are templates that you can reuse in different places in your bot so that your bot gets a consistent personality, tone of voice, but it also helps you set it up so that you can keep reusing these components across your bots even. Conditional response templates are one where you could have your bot come back with a response based on a specific condition. The condition in this case could be context. For user experience, Conversation Designer will natively support being able to adapt your bot's responses between speak versus display. We also have a deeply integrated card designer that you can build your card right there in Conversation Designer and get a live preview of what the card is going to look like. To hook up your business logic, you get 3 different options. You could write inline JavaScript that then connects up to your existing web APIs. We also have a nice HTTP wrapper. Pretty much every single business out there that's got an app or website already have web APIs that their app or websites are already calling into. And you could call into those exact same backend that you have from Conversation Designer. If you prefer to write code in a language that's not JavaScript, let's say you want to write in C#, of course you could write your code and stand that up as an Azure function. Conversation Designer will make it super easy for you to use your existing Azure functions or get set up with one that you want to use for your business logic. A quick sort of overview into end-to-end of how this is going to work. Authors across all disciplines will use the visual tool, the Conversation Designer, to author a bot. As part of authoring time, you sort of will be building your language model by providing the bot example utterances for what the user can say. This still will head up the LUIS service, part of Cognitive Service, to build a trained model for your bot. Once the model is built, the bot itself is deployed in your own Azure subscription as a website. The conversation runtime is also deployed in your own subscription. All of the bot assets, be it the agent file that describes what the conversational flow is, your business logic, which is the JavaScript file, your cards, Every single thing is getting served out of your own subscription, your own website. Along with all this, LUIS, the core LUIS runtime, will also be running locally inside your Azure subscription. Now, when end users talk across several different channels, that flows through the Microsoft connector service, and the bot conversation designer bot is talking the exact same bot activity protocol. Next up, let's take a look at Conversation Designer in action. You guys saw this page already. This is my bot's page. To create a Conversation Designer-based bot, I can simply hit Create. I showed you guys this option. Yep. Is that better? I already showed you guys the first option, which is where you could register your bot builder SDK bot, or you could get up with the Azure Bot Service bot. To create a Conversation Designer bot, simply hit Create. The entire bot is going to be provisioned inside your own Azure subscription. Perfect. Let me try that again. Oh, I know what's going on. I need new auth. Let me restart. Still no though. Let's try a private browser. Sorry about that. Thanks for your patience. Really want to show you guys the demo here. Okay. Awesome. Let's try one last fallback. Switch to my backup machine. It's on 8. Okay. Oh no. Good. So I hit create, and this is sort of creating the bot setup inside my own subscription. So I just pick a name for my bot, choose a handle, say which Azure subscription I want to use, pick out the region I want to use. I want to switch tabs, and then get a Microsoft App ID and key, hit create. It's as simple as that to create a bot. Once the bot is provisioned, this is sort of where you will land. And say hello to Conversation Designer. Let me zoom in here a little bit as well. Is that better? Okay. The Build tab is where you will spend most of your time building your bot. The Channels tab allows you to easily deploy your bot across all supported Bot Framework channels. The Analytics tab gives you a bird's eye view into your bot's health. The Settings tab is where you go to manage your bot. Conversation Designer has a deeply integrated test option, so you could talk to your bot as you're building it. The output window at the bottom of the screen gives you rich static and runtime errors and warnings. Anything that we could detect statically as things that might not work for your bot will show up in the validation errors. The JavaScript output and the runtime output sort of gives you a debug spew, or anything that you have as console.log or console error in your JavaScript code would show up here. Your bot itself is modeled as a collection of tasks that it can perform. So that's what you see up here. And it also needs a bunch of different assets to be able to complete those tasks. The assets in Conversation Designer, or intents, entities, these are powered by LUIS, and this corresponds to the language understanding block that you saw in the slide deck. Dialogue, this is again corresponding to the dialogue block. Scripts, this is where your business logic goes. Simple and conditional responses, this is sort of for the language generation purposes. And cards, this gets back into the user experience adaptation. Tasks themselves are modeled after the simple, if this trigger is met, then go do this action model. We've made it super easy for you to understand what the trigger is. So for in this case, this is where the bot is going to come back with a welcome message. So we're saying if the user joins or leaves the conversation, run a piece of code that then determines if we need to greet the user. If that trigger is met, then come back with a reply. The reply is one of the singleton conversation model, and the bot is going to come back with this specific response. In fact, in the web chat window, that's exactly what happened already. When I started this bot, it picked up that a new user was added, and it came back with a greeting message. Let's take a look at the greeting task here. This is one where I'm using a LUIS intent to power this specific trigger. So I've set this up as if the user says or types something, do language understanding, and here's the specific intent name that I'm going to use. And with deep LUIS integration, you could stay right in Conversation Designer and build your language model by providing example utterances for things that this specific intent should look for. So I've set that up for the greeting intent, and if this trigger is met, then the bot is again going to come back with a reply, and it's going to be one of these three variations. Notice that from the language generation point of view, you automatically get that variability that your bot can come back with. It can come back with a slightly different response every single time. We also support adaptation between what the bot says versus displays. Let's go ahead and try and talk to this bot. So I'm going to say hi. Oh my god, another auth tokens. I need to refresh this. Okay, let's try that again. So I'm going to say hi. The bot came back with, I'm a bot. What's going on here is that this specific utterance mapped the greeting intent that triggered the greeting task, and then the bot came back with one of these three responses. If I said something that the bot does not understand, like Santa wants a blue ribbon, then that got picked up by this fallback task here, and the bot came back with this specific reply. For do actions, as we were talking about the three different types of dialogue, you can either have your bot come back with a reply, which is good for singleton conversation, or you can go execute a piece of code, which is the script action, which can again come back with a which can again be useful to power singleton conversation, or you can execute a dialogue. To help demonstrate script triggers in action, I've got another bot here that can basically echo back what the user says. And I've set this task up to rely on this specific piece of code that is trying to determine if this trigger should fire. If you look at the actual code for this trigger, it's fairly straightforward. So let me zoom in again a little bit here. All that I'm trying to do here is I'm checking to see if the incoming message has things like echo or repeat. And if it is, then I'm extracting the message that follows it, set that up as a task entity, and say this trigger should fire. That's pretty much all the code I have here. When the trigger fires, we are extracting an entity, which is captured here, that we are capturing a user message entity as part of this trigger. And the bot is just going to come back and repeat what the user said, and it's referencing to the user message entity in its response. Let's try this. Hopefully I won't need to refresh this page and log in again. So if I say echo, I really love this demo, I do need to. Let me go ahead and queue up all the tabs. Let's get back here. Let's try that again. So the bot picked up the echo task triggered, and then the bot came back and said, this is exactly what you said, because it was able to extract that specific entity. The other thing that you saw was QnAMaker.ai. Here's the exact same QnAMaker service, and I've added a task here to be able to hook up into that service. And I'm doing that by using a script trigger once again. And if you look at the actual code for this, all that I'm doing is I'm making a HTTP call out to the QnAMaker service to be able to see if there is an answer for this specific question that the user is asking me. If there is an answer, then I get the answer, set that as a task entity, and the bot is going to come back with that answer. This is sort of demonstrating how you could use Conversation Designer bot to plug into other custom AI tools or services that are out there. Let's try and talk to this bot and see how it goes. So if I said something like, who's your CEO? It came back with the answer for that. To help demonstrate dialogue, I have one other bot here. This is a bot that can have a very simple back and forth conversation with the user when the user asks the bot, who are you? So just as with a bunch of other tasks that we looked at, I've got a language understanding backed trigger here that I've set up, and then I'm going to do a dialogue or execute a dialogue action in this case. Dialogue itself in Conversation Designer is modeled as a structured directed flow. Every single conversational state has its own associated editor where you can specify properties for that state. For instance, get username is a prompt state, and this is what the bot uses to ask the user for the information. I could include a card, and here's how the bot is going to understand user's response to the prompt. Again, with the same thing as in task, you can design and build your language model right here in the designer. And then here are the entities that this specific intent is going to spit out. If the user said something that your bot was not expecting, then here's how the bot is going to reprompt the user for information. Again, you can attach a card there. And the conversation runtime actually powers key or provides key events that your business logic can hook into. So in this case, things like, before deciding to execute any single prompt, you could write a custom piece of code that then validates the entity that you already have or your bot has collected before you can decide if you want to prompt or reprompt. It could also be helpful for things like, being able to tailor the response that the bot is going to come back in a piece of code. So that's what I'm doing here. Let's try and talk to this bot. So if I said, who are you? I should trigger that specific task. It's asking me for my name. I'm going to say, call me Vishwak. I picked that up, and it says I'm a sample bot. Next up, sort of bringing all of these different aspects together, here's the Contoso Cafe bot. By the way, this is the exact same bot that you saw powering all the conversational experiences in all the preceding demos. So it's got the welcome message, it can echo, it can do greeting, it can give me help, it can answer who are you, book a table, find cafe locations, and so on and so forth. Booking a table is one of the structured directed flows that we were talking about. And here's the actual dialogue for that flow. It looks fairly straightforward in that I'm trying to get the location, and then I'm trying to get the date and time, how many guests is the user bringing, checking to see if a table is possible, then I'm asking the user to confirm the reservation. If we have any changes, because the user could make a change when we are trying to confirm the reservation, then we go back and revalidate if the table is possible. If there are no changes or if the user confirms, we're going to go ahead and book the table, read out what the outcome was, and we're done. Structured directed flows like this are really effective at modeling task completion style tasks. The other thing that you'd sort of notice here is that dialogues are actually composable, meaning you could have one dialogue, that is this dialogue flow, call into another dialogue. So I've got a ground user location dialogue, which I can then use in a bunch of different tasks. This sort of gives you that sort of modular approach that you can define these basic conversational pieces that you can reuse in a bunch of different places within your bot. Let's go ahead and try and book a table here real quick. Seattle, let's say tomorrow at 3 p.m. Then pick up the date. Let's try tomorrow. Let's do 2 guests. Picked up all pieces of information. I'm going to say book it, and it did book the table. Although structured directed flows are really good for these type of conversations, users are not so structured when it comes to their thinking. We as humans are so used to quickly changing our thoughts or mind and digressing from the topic. With the power of conversation runtime, as well as with deep LUIS integration, conversation designer-based bots can easily adapt to that, and it not only follows the user, but also deeply understands them. Let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to start by saying book a table for 2. And of course, remembering context, so the bot comes back and says, you want to come into Seattle, right? Because we were just talking about Seattle. And I'd be like, no, I would like to come into Redmond and let's say next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Notice that I'm providing a piece of information that the bot isn't necessarily expecting at this specific turn of the conversation. So it picked up Redmond, and it also picked up that I'm coming in on this specific date and time. I'd already provided the party size, and it picked that up correctly. And this is what we mean by having that fluidity, as well as being able to support things like forward slot filling. But the user might change their mind even while we're here. So I'm going to actually say, okay, I want to bring my friends as well. I'm going to make it to 5 guests and hit book it. And the bot picked up that correction experience even though I made that at the very last turn of the conversation. A couple of other things that I want to show while I'm here. Here's a simple response template. Simple response templates are really useful for coming back with a bunch of different variations. And in Conversation Designer, you can actually see what are the different places that a specific template is used in. So I'm using this in a specific dialogue, and this is sort of how I'm using that template. Conditional responses are backed by a specific business logic. So in a use case where, let's say, and I'll show this to you guys. So if I say find cafe locations in Paris, I do want to understand that the user is talking about Paris, which is a specific city, but that does not work because Contoso Cafe is not available in that location. And the way I'm doing that is by getting set up with a conditional response template that sort of comes back with one of different variations that's backed by a piece of business logic. This is sort of where the rule that says if I picked up a geography.city, then come back with this response, but if I did not pick up anything, then come back with a different response. And here are all the cards that are in this bot. You would have seen a bunch of these as well. One of the things I was talking about is the integrated adaptive card editor and builder. So here it is. So as I'm making changes to the bot, I can build it right here in line. And as I make changes here, like if I type in foobar, you get a rich preview on the right side of how this card is going to look like. Excellent. Just to be clear, you actually don't need Conversation Designer to be able to build great bots. Specifically, all the design aspects that we were talking about is totally achievable and doable today using the Bot Builder SDK as well as the Azure Bot Service. Some of you might be scratching your head going like, well, how does all of these things fit together? So here's an attempt to help answer that. When you start building your bot or designing and prototyping your bot using Conversation Designer, you could then also continue to use Conversation Designer, hook up your business logic to build a fully end-to-end functional bot. The bot in this case is hosted in your own Azure subscription. Like I was saying, you get the power of conversation runtime that is deployed locally in your subscription. You also get the LUIS runtime as well locally in your subscription. Even while you start from Conversation Designer, let's say you want to use the Azure Bot Service that's powered by the Bot Builder SDK for the actual code behind our business logic hookup. You could totally do that as well. All of the assets that your design team as well as your writers create in Conversation Designer will be readily consumable inside your Bot Builder SDK-based bot. Just that in this case, the SDK is the actual conversation runtime that is still hosted in Azure in your subscription. The other noticeable difference is that LUIS is still running externally, and there is a call that the SDK makes to be able to get an answer from LUIS. You could also choose to implement a bot that you started with in Conversation Designer using the Bot Builder SDK. The sort of flexibility that Bot Builder SDK gives you is that you could then host that bot in your own custom cloud and still be able to use LUIS or any of the other AI tools and services out there to power your bot conversations. So to sum it all up, conversational experiences are starting to show up in tons of different places. Please incorporate Microsoft Cognitive Services in your next bot. Design your bot so that people can talk to it, type to it, and also tap to it. Build great bots that adapt to context, device context, user context, and environmental context. Model your conversational flows for your bot effectively. Pick and choose the right type of dialogue that is effective for your specific scenario. Hope you'll pick the right tooling and hosting service for your bot across the Azure Bot Service as well as Conversation Designer versus the Bot Builder SDK. And check out a bunch of different resources that we already looked at, dev.botframework.com, or GitHub page, or the Azure Bot Service page. While you guys are here, I thought I'd sort of give you guys a pointer to a couple of other relevant sessions that are going to be available. Tomorrow, there is a talk that Robert Stanifer is doing. That's a theater talk that's available tomorrow morning. And then Robert and Stindy are also going to share a breakout session where they're going to be talking about best practices from actual customers that are building bots using Bot Framework right now. That said, I really hope that you found the session useful. Thanks for your time, and happy bot building. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent question. So the question is, does the Conversation Designer, will it support multilingual experiences, as well as when is it available? The first question, the answer is Conversation Designer will support every single language that LUIS is available in. The answer to the second question, we are super hard at work to get this in front of you guys, and we sincerely hope that it'll happen this year, but that's what we are working really hard at. Stay tuned. Any other questions?
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Quick question. In one of your demos, you're showing more of a complex chained action. I believe you said find a restaurant and then text me the address. Mm-hmm. Can you show you how you achieve chaining the events through Conversation in the Designer? Yeah, sure. Before I jump in, are there any other questions that I can take? I can also, if you have time, I can show it to you. Yeah. Yep.
Name of the tool, QnAMaker?
Yeah.
Yes. In the demo, you showed it connecting to a KB, and I'm assuming that's the Microsoft KB. In theory, could we connect to a third party? We use the Oracle Right Now cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. So if the third-party service has something like a KB that you could search over, or you could even use Azure Search for that matter, and you could make a web API call to that specific service and be able to get an answer and hook that up.
Right.
It's going to be pretty straightforward.
Thank you.
Yep.
QnAMaker.
I can still hear you.
QnAMaker, does it talk to LUIS at the back end? Is QnA a front end for the LUIS?
No. So it turns out that figuring out, given an utterance, what's the specific domain and intent, versus given a question, search over possible knowledge base to come back with an answer are like slightly different problems. So they have two different systems, AI systems that are powering them behind the scene, but that's sort of what's going on. It's not that the QnAMaker relies on LUIS at all.
So if we're using LUIS to do some QnA-like functions, anything wrong with that?
No, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just that it's actually going to be probably slightly bit more cumbersome because LUIS actually does well with the generalization problem. Yeah. So unless for every single question that you have in your knowledge base that there is an infinite generalization series, like multiple different ways the user can ask that same question, right, it's probably better off doing QnAMaker. For things like book a table, there is probably like bazillion ways that user could express that intent. That's sort of where LUIS shines, and it's sort of which one is better for your specific scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yep.
Does the Conversation Designer have like a promotion structure where you have like a dev, QA, production, or is it all in like one instance that you have to try and figure out how to not things hit production unintentionally?
Excellent question. So one of the things that I didn't get to demo today, but Conversation Designer supports is like being able to export and import your bot as a whole unit. So the other thing that you could also do is with Azure, you could also set up deployment slots for your bot. So you could have a staging slot or a dev slot and a production slot so things don't get crisscrossed or like mucked around at all. Between both of those, you could also export from Conversation Designer, get it checked into your own source control, and have people be able to collaborate that way. Excellent. Hi.
Hello, this was a great session. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question about what out of this can be done on premise? Like, can everything be done? Or I think LUIS is not there, and so.
So part and parcel of what we are hard at work is to help solve that specific question or answer that question. Remember that like a lot of Bot Framework itself is in like public preview right now. We haven't hit GA yet. And we hope to be able to answer almost all of those questions on what can go on-prem versus what cannot as part of that comprehensive effort. So I don't have an immediate answer to you, but the only thing that probably would be interesting for you is the Conversation Designer case. The bot itself is in your own Azure subscription. So you could have that be, sitting in a well-defined environment where you have better control over the data that is flowing in and out.
Okay. I can talk to you offline, but
Yeah,
I've
sounds
been
great.
working on UCMA stuff.
Perfect.
So
Yep. Any other questions here? Yep. Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. 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 I think it might be better to just draw out your flow so I can come find you once I'm wrapped up here. I said it might be better for me to just draw up a flow on the notebook so that you can see how it could be done. So let me come find you after I wrap up here. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
I noticed in one of the scripts, you're connecting to another cognitive service and you have the key embedded in the script. I do that a lot, but my paranoia says don't put keys in JavaScript because JavaScript isn't exactly secure.
Yeah.
Is there a mechanism in there when you are extending to other cognitive services to protect those keys?
We are working on it.
Good answer.
So you could have you could set
You're
up.
aware
Think of it as a token broker service that sort of obfuscates and gives you a session expiry based token.
As long as you're aware of it,
Yep.
that's good.
Yep.
Would that be using default?
Not something that I could disclose as yet because it's being actively developed upon, but totally love the feedback. We will share something more pretty soon.
When is the Conversation Designer coming out?
So yeah, like I said, we are super hard at work. It's come a long way, and it's about there for us to be able to get it in front of you guys. And I sincerely hope that it will happen this year, and that's what we're working really hard towards.
Any plans to add any other channels? Are there any other major announcements about the Bot Framework coming?
None as of none as part of this specific talk. But do check out the blog. Even last week we announced Azure bot service supporting Azure web apps. So stuff keeps rolling out constantly. It's not like we're waiting for key moments with a chunk of new features to announce that out to you guys. As soon as things are available, it's usually available immediately.
One more question from me. So I've been playing around with the SharePoint framework examples that have been out there and have really kind of started using a lot more of the back channel functionalities. Are there any plans in the Conversation Designer to kind of automate or make it more like a connector that plugs into SharePoint or the other tools to get that back channel information without actually having to ask the user?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of other similar interesting scenarios that we are also thinking about. So you brought up the SharePoint scenario. The other one is sort of Microsoft Flow or Power Apps kinds of things that you want to plug into backend data. We're totally sort of aware of it. We're thinking through that space. We don't have anything that sort of rings and sings and dances and works together very well, but it's definitely an area that we are actively investigating. Yep.
The bot connector that you showed there, where does one go to see WeChat's very big for us right now, and we want to keep on a lot of these different channels working. Good place to go to see what development's being done there, what new channels are being added.
Oh, it's just dev.botframework.com. Any announcement would flow through the bot as well.
For the bot connector?
Including the connectors as well that are available. Or if you already have a bot, and if you open up your bot that you've registered in dev.botframework.com, there is a channels tab on the top right. You could hit that too to see all the list of available channels that you can connect up to.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, and hope you found this useful. Thank you.